We are ready to kick off. Thank you, everyone, and welcome Dr. Bhavani Shankar, Raman, Sundaram for joining our panel of the day. And we are going to unearth a new future with careers in environment studies. So I was very excited to note that environment didn't leave our discussion since morning, and there was a fair bit of interest from students. And I know there's a bulk of you signed in here, but there's lots of you watching us live as well. So thank you so much. I'll take a minute to quickly introduce our panel for today. We're joined by Raman Singh. Raman is the head HR at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. We popularly call her CEEW. She is a talent engagement and development expert leading the Council on Energy, Environment and Water's HR function. And Raman studied economics at the Hinton School. We're joined by Dr. Bhavani Shankar Subramanian, the head of school at Lalaji Memorial Omega International School based in Chennai. And he has been, of course, integrating policies of various education boards and inclusive education models with the institutional demands. He leads a group of instructional leaders to implement the same, and has been credited globally and nationally for the efforts that you're leading. So thank you so much, Dr. Bhavani Shankar, for joining us. We're joined by our own Dr. Bharat Sundaram. Sundaram Fastener's Assistant Professor of Environmental Studies from the School of Interwoven Arts and Sciences at CREA. As Professor of Environmental Studies, Dr. Bharat enjoys using an interdisciplinary approach to address challenges posed by the dynamism between environment and society. He completed his PhD from Manipal University and his master's from Pondicherry University. Thank you so very much, panelists, for joining us on a Saturday afternoon, which is so precious, but also equally we're responsible for the number of students and parents who've been glued in here from 9:30 a.m. Trying to find answers to the many questions they have. And we'll try and delve over the next hour and a half, 1 hour of just some discussions and take some questions as and when they come along. And explore a bit about this realm of environmental studies, what's happening and all of that. So I'm going to, start a bit about the study itself, and going to ask a bit about EVS as we know. I mean, we've always studied that from school and college, but really it's really has transformed in nature in the last many years. We're beginning to hear buzzwords of climate change and biodiversity and sustainability, and all this actually come up. So in your opinion, if you could just share a bit about what have you seen as the significant changes in the study of environmental studies in the last decade. Raman, if we can start with you.
Okay, sure. I think a lot of things have changed since we studied EVS in school and college, right? I mean, the world around us is an example of what is going on. I don't think it could be a more relevant juncture to possibly discuss these things. What has really happened is that I would say that, in the course of when we were in school, college, and the way we kind of studied, if I just go back, right, the kind of essays we were writing, how will you save, it's Earth Day, how will you save your environment from pollution? What do you think about noise pollution? What do you think of plastic waste management? We were, even students 20 years ago were taught to think in this way. And it's pretty much, I have a nephew and a niece, both at Shriram, and I see, pretty much the curriculum has of course evolved. They're made to do recycling, they're made to do recycling projects. So of course that awareness is much more there, especially if you're living in a place like Delhi where air pollution, is rampant. So that comes up for conversation every October to December. But I think a couple of things have changed. One is that that tipping point has been broken where now the awareness of it is almost universal, right? It's no more like, I think that recognition and that awareness across student groups, across communities is very much there, that we as a community, as world citizens are probably facing the highest, the highest probability of tail end risks, of climate risks happening, and at much more frequent intermissions than ever before, right? So the data is out there, the analysis is out there, right? Be it on the ground CSOs, be it think tanks such as ours, people are studying that data and making it available very widely. So the awareness is there. The range of the debate also has I would say, exploded,
Mm.
right? It's not just about the environment. It's about how are we thinking about our cities of the future? Are we creating sustainable cities? How are we thinking about mobility? How are we thinking about our food chain, right? So that element of sustainability has cut through across. I would say the ambition is there. We're poised for the ambition. I'm seeing a lot of ambition at community, at think tank, at government levels. That tipping from the ambition to the action, to the delivery, is where I think the decade ahead of us really lies.
Mhm.
So that would be my take on it.
Okay. Dr. Bhavani, if I could request your comments and thoughts around the whole dialogue itself. How have you seen that change?
I agree with the sentiments already. So yes, there has been an increasing awareness, but then what are we going to do with this awareness? I'm more concerned about the points that we have on hand that are actionable. I would go ahead and say that from awareness to reflection. See, now I am certain that over the last 10 years or no, I know why the Millennium Development Goals failed. And then see why some of the goals were in conflict with one another, especially when we are talking about economic growth on one hand and poverty alleviation that goes with it, and the traditional practices that are in conflict with the environment. So that's something that permitted me to reflect on as a student and also as an engaged educationist to see what did we do wrong over the last 10 years. See, I know now I'm about 7 billion and I'm still growing. See, what am I going to do as this human population continues to grow? Even with the COVID in place, we have data that some of the African countries have sustained growth in population through 2020. So what's actually happening here is the divide that is generated between, say, what we perceive to do for the environment and our commitment to do something for the environment and the actual engagement in this process. Now, if there is a gap in my awareness and actually my behavior towards the environment, how am I going to address these gaps? So I'm able to reflect better. I mean, that is one saving grace, I would say. And if I know the age, possibly the socioeconomic status, the gender, the geography, possibly the resource availability, and the attitudes and awareness, do they actually impact my behavior to a large extent to the environment? That I am acutely aware of now on my reflection. So the question is moving ahead with respect to the action. So how do I experience this in the action? See, I can talk a lot of what has happened with respect to the education at the K to 12 landscape. I would not have much to talk about the post-secondary landscape, but see the creative problem solving that can happen by immersing the learner into real life situations. So all these environments that we are talking about, they are interconnected. The social, the physical, and the organic environments are all interconnected. So if I am able to engage them, so in pro-environmental behavior, so to say, to study the impact of their own, say, engagement and experiences, they would certainly learn better. Now we also know about the very ambitious global action program of the UNESCO on education for sustainable development. So I see this is interestingly worded as the gap, GAP, and I see this gap really, really big. So even with our efforts to set these actions in motion, I would say, how are we going to limit possibly greenhouse emissions? Are we going to minimize waste and pollution, protect and restore ecosystems, support any other adaptation to the effects of climate change. These are things that I can introduce to the children. And I see the level of engagement. We did hear about the 4 R's, the reduce, the recycle, the reuse, and also the refuse. So these are things that are introduced in terms of action, and we see that the children's engagement in any of these activities towards, preserving the environment as it is, all the 3 levels, the organic, physical, and the social environment, seems to be the level of the change that has actually happened.
Interesting. So you're actually saying from a pure just awareness, maybe in an unaware and awareness stage, you're kind of to an action and reflection phase is quite an interesting movement in terms of what's happening. And clearly, yes, what your institutions are doing at the K-12. Bharat, if I could get your thoughts and comments in terms of how have you seen the dialogue change and chop and shift in the decade?
Thank you, Kalap, and thank you, Bhavani and Raman. Those were lovely thoughts. So when I started and I finished my master's, it's been more than 2 decades since I finished my master's. And I remember my parents asking me when I decided to study ecology, that why do you want to study sewage treatment and pollution? So did my neighbors, so did all my friends. That was the level of the field at that time. But in my career of teaching undergraduate students and master's students over the last decade or so, my experience has been that what Dr. Bhavani Shankar mentioned about that movement from just pure awareness to reflecting on the awareness to trying to affect change based on that awareness, to a more instrumental focus on how is this going to benefit me as a person intellectually, academically, professionally, and so on. And that for me is the biggest transformation in the last decade or so, is the explosion that Raman referred to, and an understanding that the environment is going to pretty much affect every sphere of your life for the times to come, right? Given that climate change is upon us and environmental change is more and more visible every day, it is also impacting our day-to-day economic actions, social actions, political actions, and so on and so forth. And therefore, this is a very fertile ground for the reflective action that I think Dr. Bhavani Shankar is referring to. Okay, you have awareness, but how can I now find my calling or my future life, my professional life, and try to get it to reflect environmental concerns, right? So academically, of course, this is very, very clear cut in that sense. So psychologists, for example, are trying to understand what eco-anxiety is. Why are people so worried about the environment much more now than they ever have been before? Economists are worried about how cost-benefit analysis that takes into account environmental effects are going to basically change the fundamental way in which we measure economic growth. Computer scientists and math modelers are worried about how they can make their artificial intelligence and machine learning methods better in order to understand environmental change. In the same way, people in the social sector and the social studies are trying to understand what will be the environmental fallouts of trying to achieve equity, right? So it's very clear that all of us on the planet cannot afford to live like a middle-class American, purely for the fact that they consume far more environmental resources than they should. So then what is the alternative, right? If we're talking about a low carbon pathway to development, what does that really mean? Is something that a lot of social scientists are thinking about in conjunction with the scientists from the natural sciences, from the natural sciences. So the stuff that brings this all together in the academic sphere is really development studies and planning, because we really cannot build the cities the way we are, like Raman alluded to earlier. We can't follow that old pathway, right? So the academic sphere is very clear to me, but more and more, the business sphere is also becoming slightly more clear to me. Your bottom line is going to be impacted by the environment in very fascinating ways in the next 20 years or so. So environment is not just something that somebody is interested in pollution or water quality. All these are laudable interests, right? I have a lot of respect for people who want to study pollution. It's such a difficult field to study. because of what are called non-target issues. The pollution happens somewhere else. These are called non-point emissions. So the pollution happens thousands of kilometers away sometimes, and it comes to hit the other place. So I'm not taking away anything from the people who study pollution and toxicology and all of that, but I see just permeating into pretty much every sphere of professional life in ways that one cannot imagine. It's going to affect your supply chains. It's going to affect how you source your natural resources for manufacturing. It's going to change fundamentally the way in which you manufacture things. Water is going to play a huge role even in the next decade and longer in every aspect of our life. So it's just not. So basically, what I'm trying to sum up, I'll try and sum it up by saying that environment is no longer the focus of only environment studies people. That game has changed now, and that I think is the biggest development in the last decade.
No, perfectly put. And then, the fact that you talked about this being at the individual, at the community, at the society, at the national and more global level, which makes sense, which kind of segues right into my next question round, which is about this whole interface of environment studies, if you like, with so many other disciplines. And we did talk about it being touching many areas. So Raman, if I have to just talk to a little bit about, let's talk about these other parallel disciplines, social studies or psychology or biology. In that sense, where do you see people who are quite interested in environment studies to be more aware of or understand that interface better?
Okay. So I think exactly like how Bharat mentioned, right? It is going to take an interdisciplinary approach, right? To solve some of the biggest challenges that are around us, right? If I give you like a real example, for example, we're a public
We lost you.
Did we lose her?
Yeah, I think.
think tank, right? You can reach. Oh,
Yeah, we lost you for a while, Raman.
For a brief, you're back.
okay. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, now we are.
Yes.
Okay.
So
great.
after you said brief example, I think we got cut off.
Sure. So I said, let me try and make it a little bit more closer to home, right? Which is at the
We again lose her.
We lost her.
Raman, we slightly lost you again.
Maybe it's a bandwidth. If she turns off video, it might work better.
Okay. Anybody else want to go first while I sort this out?
Sure.
So we can hear you now. Maybe
Yeah,
the
and I'll
video
come
bandwidth.
back. Okay.
No problem.
Okay, wonderful. So what I was saying is that here at the council, we pretty much use data, integrated analyses, and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, misuse, and reuse of resources. That's what we stand for, right? It's a public policy research think tank.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why I'm bringing up this example is that if we look at the kind of people, right, that we hire, right, the type of people, the kind of skills, the kind of capabilities, right? We would of course look at people from an environmental background or a social disciplines background, but we also hire engineers in great proportion because they are the best at integrated analyses, right? We also hire very strong behavioral economists because, like my panelists rightly point out, a lot of what this decade of delivery is going to have to bring for us is nudging people towards the right behaviors, nudging communities, nudging households, nudging government, right, to take the right decisions. We hire, very strong communication professionals because great research without the right outreach is, just half the battle. It's the yin and yang of any coin. So even for students who are studying environment, right, my suggestion to them would be that it's a very integrated issue. It is not an issue of just environment today. How are you going to create jobs if you substitute a, like say, I'm not a researcher, so I'm talking about it in, in common HR language. But what I'm trying to say is the following, that if you make the transition from, say, for example, fossil fuels to clean energy, right? You may get an argument that you're losing jobs, for example, right? Now, till the time you're not able to show that actually these green jobs are going to create many more different kinds of jobs and in the long run be good, not just for the environment, but also for the economy,
Hmm.
you're not going to be able to get an actual change, right? So as students who are studying the environment, I would strongly encourage you to look at the environment from an interdisciplinary lens. What are the behavioral implications? What are the economic implications? What does my government care about? And government, mapped to the district level, of course, right? Because it's not a one size fits all. What
Hmm.
do my communities care about? Because if these are going to be our, and I'm hoping some of them will be our Greta Thunberg, going forward, you're going to have a very holistic approach. Some of them may thrive, in community campaigns. Others may thrive, looking at it from an analysis point of view. Still others may, choose to go and try and make a change from inside out on the policy side, right, by joining think tanks or the government. So, but to be able to even get that holistic perspective, engage with the analyses, look at the data, right? Look at the data which is out there. I think today a lot of data portals have live data on a variety of parameters, right? How are temperatures changing? Which regions, are facing heat stress? Where are the water problems, right? What is the climate atlas looking like? Look at the data. Look at, what are the insights you're drawing from there? Look at the economics, right? What's getting lost? What's getting gained, right? And look at it from a behavioral change perspective. So don't look at it in silos. It is an integrated discipline.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. So Dr. Palanishankar, your thoughts a bit about how, one, of course, this whole interdisciplinary nature of environmental studies, and where do you, any kind of standout examples that you see where environment studies or the study of the environment interfaces with other disciplines?
See, one, I would say now every discipline interfaces with every other discipline. So now there is no escape from, say, interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approaches to learning, because, see, all that matters is how quickly you adapt to the change requirements that any professional landscape is making available to you. So that's one. So how can this be seeded amongst the youngsters, and how we prime them towards accepting the inevitable truth of, say, engaging in activities for sustainable development? So this is something that I would want to add on when it comes to talking about, say, the interdisciplinary approaches. So, see how we engaged in some of the stories here are. I told that in action, you really need the children to experience what they see. Some interesting thoughts were to try and look at possibilities where they are not looking at job spaces, but creating their own job spaces as catalysts, and how they can become, say, in this changing landscape for careers and jobs. Say, can they become entrepreneurs themselves? Or can they explore the areas, and can the school in the K to 12 environment, say, prime them to appreciate the change in the job space and the workspace, and how the kids themselves can interestingly engage in such activities. So that's where I would come from. So the interdisciplinarity of it, Dr. Raman said that, so you can't wish it away. So every branch of the humanities or social science, or for let's say natural sciences, are interconnected with one another. And I would say environment would be the inevitable, the quintessential word that fits into almost all these areas. I would quickly go on and say that, see, what the school environment does is to prime the children and make them ready to get into professional spaces in universities at the tertiary education landscapes where they can explore their interest for sustainable development and the respect for different kinds of environment they are in. So to that effort, I would say, see, schools have taken up projects. Schools like us have taken up projects which are multidisciplinary in nature, where a particular demand, let us say, one such project was to look at, a day at the vegetable market, on a rainy day. So this sort of brought forward various elements of how the children are wired to look at the problem on hand. And somebody talked about pollution, somebody talked about power cuts, somebody talked about bad roads, somebody wanted to short circuit the entire process by ordering things online. So you understand that all of these talk about how the children engage in this project. So we wanted to look back in history and took a project on something like a day in the life of a rickshaw puller. So immediately, somebody who is wired on social sciences or humanities would talk about human rights, would talk about a lot of aspects that connect with economics. And somebody would say that, okay, that would be an interesting option for us not to generate greenhouse gases. And somebody would talk about biomechanics, and somebody would talk about how the aspects of everyday workspace has actually changed. Now, what it does to their association with the changing landscapes are that the children are able to understand and appreciate the interconnectedness of things, and also able to dialogue and debate about the different points of view presented by their peers. And this, I would say, would be the seed that is important for children to engage actively on aspects of environmental sciences. So I would go ahead and say something more, because these are all anecdotal and examples. What we did is we created a 3 million liter rainwater harvesting tank, and then started working to look at the total dissolved solids, the mineral load in the water. And interestingly, from a TDS of about 1,200, it dropped to about 400 in a span of about 4 or 5 years. So these are all real life experiences that the children have while they are at school, and are able to appreciate the various aspects of learning environment.
Interesting. Yeah, there are. Yeah, very interesting. Our poll results just came in, and there's, as always, a lot of students continue to be in the audience, so which is interesting. Bharat, I'm going to come to you with this particular thing. One is, you, of course, appreciate interdisciplinary part of the environment studies, but I want you to also talk a little bit about this interface with economics, and also what are we doing around bringing environment and economics together differently at CREA as well. So if I could just get your comments and thoughts about that.
Thank you, Kala. So before I do that, if I could just introduce myself a bit, because my journey has also been kind of a complicated one, which has become more and more interdisciplinary as time has gone by. I won't bore everyone with the details, but I've just put up some stuff on the chat box that you can take a look at, just to get an idea of the kinds of research I do, the kind of popular writing that I do. And for those students who are curious about what CREA life looks like, take a look at my Insta account. The point really is that, like I mentioned earlier, it turns out that it's becoming harder and harder to study disciplines in their isolated kind of silos as we go along. This is not to say that specialists are not required. right? So what I'm trying to say is that currently, till now at least, specialists have always had their day in the sun. They will continue to have their days in the sun. They are highly sought after people. But what I see is that your generalist or your person who's competent to talk about one, two or more disciplines are catching up very, very fast. What does that mean in the context of the environment? Let me just give you a very, very small example, right? I was speaking to somebody who's in agriculture. He's in the enterprise side of agriculture. And he was telling me that more and more countries are stopping water-heavy agricultural products from being exported, right? So this is a very nice insight for me, because we in India we export quite a few crops that are water intensive. And the point that he was trying to make, this person who was working for a large enterprise in India that sources agricultural produce, is that what we're essentially doing is that we're exporting water as a result, right? And therefore, the water cost of our country is indirectly going up on spending water, growing food that even we are not consuming. And the price that we're getting for that water, and this is where pricing comes in from an economic standpoint. The pricing is too high, right? In the sense that we're not getting paid enough for the water that we're sending out. So these are the kinds of insights that are now coming out, right? So I'll give you another example. Many people are talking about how energy efficiency or energy access is very, very important, and that we need to transition to more renewable sources of energy. Now, it turns out that at the global policy level, the World Trade Organization and the TRIPS, the organizations with intellectual property and so on, are the countries who are signatories to these treaties are constantly at each other, because they want to maximize what they see as the profitability from globalization, rather than localization. So what this means very specifically is that even if I do develop technology at a local level to make solar energy more efficient, there will be barriers at the international policy level that make me uphold this technology for a long period of time before someone else kind of protests, saying that you're not enabling global trade. So also at multiple levels, you see stuff happening at the local level, the way we do agriculture, or at the regional level, and at the global level in terms of global capital flows and how that very closely tracks at the environment. All of this was what led us to think about the joint major in economics and environment studies as a kind of a worthwhile enterprise in that sense, right? Because students have to, like I said earlier, understand the environmental foundations of our economic lives, and also to understand that till now we've been treating the planet as if it's a unlimited bank account, where we can just keep making withdrawals and the bill will never come to us. When the bill comes to be paid, the problem is that we'll be long gone. I mean, you and I, Kala, will all be long gone. And therefore, that's exactly why citizen-led movements like Greta Thunberg or even the Extinction Rebellion in the UK are laying the responsibility of this generation's economic actions and its implications for the environment, and asking for political and economic accountability. So this is a very big idea, right? Like I hope you would have got the idea that this is something that that gives almost everyone something to do, irrespective of their interests. So if you're interested in global policy and trade policy and its impact on the environment, you can do that. You want to look at very local level uptake of sustainable level technology and the economic cost and benefit of that, you can do that. Right? If you want to do meta level analyses about general technology uptake and technology penetration for sustainability, you can do that. So there's something for someone, So what I was thinking when Raman was talking a few minutes earlier was that this interface, or this interdisciplinary interface, has made it possible for specific roles for specific people to emerge. So that's a very special condition, I think, right? Which is worth allocating time and effort to, from the perspective of a young person. It's not that you have to do only X, Y, and Z. You can also do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and that diversity of options, I think, is unparalleled in the environment studies and economics interface, which is what led us to create a balance between data analytics, theoretical thinking in both environmental studies and economics, focus on energy and water and agriculture, as well as a focus on forests. And we put together this pretty nice list of 18 courses that one could take to qualify for the joint major. So the experiment is working so far. Our students seem to be happy, but you know, let's see how it goes, because one of the most challenging aspects of the joint major is something called the capstone, which students have to do in their third year. And for a joint major capstone, you have to also make it an interdisciplinary project mandatorily. So you can't just look at an economics-based project. You also have to introduce the environment to it. So that's been our experience so far.
Yeah. I want to, with that to Raman, in terms of, I have just hinted about, you know, where and all one could work. And that really takes me in terms of, yes, the opportunities are enormous out there. But more looking at the skills, I mean, you're kind of looking at, I always look at 3 levels. You kind of talk about specialists, the generalist, the specialist, and the versatilist. At some end, the versatilist basically comes with this umbrella understanding how all this actually integrates. So in terms of the movement of careers more, Raman, what are you seeing as really futuristic path-breaking spaces that young graduates can actually contribute in? And I know they can everywhere, but in terms of where we think that we need more focus. And also particularly, what kind of unique skills are you looking at besides all the academic bits that we're talking about? Is there something very different that graduates who want to contribute in this space need to come with, or you are seeing have a certain attribute that makes them stand out? Do we have you, Raman?
I think she's frozen, Kala.
Yeah, I'm kind of missing you. Can you hear me?
Got it. Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh,
we can hear you now. Yeah.
All right, great. I think I got the gist of your question. Thank you very much. I think as I was sort of looking at the poll, right, and we have 60% students over here, I think the first thing that I would like to say to them is that be clear or have some level of clarity on what your career purpose is, right? What do you want to be known for, right? What do you want your profile, your professional profile, to say about you, and review it every 5 years, right? That's one. The second thing I would like to say to them is, please be ambitious, because we are in a very ambitious space, right? What we're seeing in the environment space today is maybe what we saw in iBanking in the 90s, right? I would say this is the career which is attracting the best and the brightest, because many people are realizing, right? I mean, earlier it used to be, I have a passion, should I follow it, not follow it, maybe not. It's not a very conventional space to be in. I think those norms are broken because schools have been doing a fantastic job, universities have been doing a fantastic job. So be ambitious. You know, you want to kind of lead up a community movement in your, you know, in your area. There's space for that. You know, you want to work in a think tank. There's space for that. You want to work with a grassroots impact organization. There's space for that, right? And we're seeing that. And I'm not only talking about the bilaterals and the multilaterals. I'm talking about, you know, a lot of interesting spaces that people are now founding and taking up various issues, right? And the third thing you need to think about is, intellectual is great, but how are you really going to have an impact, right? How are you going to really have an impact in this, in this environmental space, right? And that's why it's very important to know what your purpose is. So now I'll come back to the second part of it, that how do careers really play out, right? I think they play out in a variety of ways, right? When I see like, young research analysts joining us, they normally always have that spark, right? It's not something you can really define, but it's the way that they think, right? They want to have an impact. They want to make a change. In our case, at the policy level, right? And they want to, have a great impact. So that's one thing that we definitely look out for, right? And the way that their careers can evolve, or careers in this space can evolve, is, you could be known as like the person who understands, for example, what the gender lens in a rural enterprise is. So you could have a very, very specialist lens that you bring to a particular issue or a topic. And you may say, I want to stay with this and go deeper and, be the person known for this, right? That's one way that I've seen people go, or I want to be the person who is going to go deep on the climate negotiations and the COP work and, read up everything around that and therefore present my ideas in that space. So that's one way that I've seen people go, or I want to be like the person on the renewable space. The other way that careers grow is more, that versatility and generalist lens, right? Which is, I have a solid understanding of broadly issues in these 2-3 areas. I want to build teams. I want to grow to be a leader. I want to, get in more funds in this space. And I want to really kind of influence activities and programs in these areas. So that's another way that I've seen careers grow. I haven't seen, I'm sure they're out there, but maybe because I work in the public policy space, I haven't seen enough examples of grassroots movements and community leaderships and, on the ground advocacy. So I'm assuming that, or I'm hypothesizing that that's also a space which is open for grabs, right? Whether you join something or you start a startup in that, but, community-led advocacy, community-led behavioral change, I see a lot of room for that also, as at least in India, as we kind of, grow. And then there's, of course, room at the state levels, right? I mean, a lot of what a lot of the environmental sector, I would say, is still concentrated in your, in your Delhi and around, right? But there's so much interesting work happening around sustainable farming, say, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, right? So there's a lot of scope for really figuring out what is the economic transition or what is the model which would work at a state level, and seeing your career take off from there. So it really depends, right? I mean, it really kind of goes down to what is your North Star, which are the subjects that appeal to you the most, where is your career going to be 5 years down the line? Do you want to be heading up a team and doing ABC work? Do you want to be founding a startup which works in ABC? You want to, be part of an Asian organization that looks at more global and worldwide issues, but be clear on your purpose and be clear on what is that, professional stamp that you want to leave every 5 years.
Fair enough. That's quite a and for young students entering into college, I hope that from schools and through their time at schools and their time at university, this is something that we can constantly keep driving in terms of talking about that purpose. And I'm going to come back there, Dr. Bhavani, in a bit about, you spoke some examples, but really, given that environment is not a subject, I mean, it's really a way of life. It's something that is for all of us a way of life. So in that sense, what is it that that you're doing at the school level to inspire young students to probably look at this as a subject? One is to be socially aware, and all of that is right. But to take it as a subject, to be able to contribute, requires a certain commitment. Is that something that that's happening at the school level?
Yes. See, I would say a very big yes. There is, because of this awareness and the commitment to it, so there is a shift towards making small changes. So the seed of change is happening, and it is very promising that most schools, just not our school, most schools are joining hands. See, the biggest challenge is that the future of the children that we are talking about was already decided in their absence. So, it was that, see, we created this future, and now they have to handle all the mess that we have created for them. So what actually happened is that these children are not responsible for the consequences of our action that they are actually facing. So for me, it's more like a guilt ride, and then how am I able to sort of alleviate the problems that I have created for them. So in that context, I would say, see, the students now are significantly engaging in community projects. So see, Dr. Raman said that, see, from the grassroots application and the engagement, you see more and more children directly getting involved to understand what has actually gone wrong. Now, see, to initiate and sustain this kind of an interest in the children, so there needs to be a very strong seed of thought that they are going to be the champions of this particular change. So rather than harping about what see, I have done as a parent or a teacher in terms of these big mistakes, I'm going to tell them that say, how can we join hands together and make this small change? So in terms of addressing the need to engage purposefully in making a positive change to the environment, say what the schools have done, I would say, in order to motivate the children, is to make them aware of their immediate environment, number one. So how they could sustain the organic environment in the visible landscape around the school. We are hugely advantaged because of a very large campus, and the students persuaded the government to give a patch of about 900 meters of agricultural canal for rehabilitation. What we have actually done over the last 12, 13 years is to ensure that we have reintroduced some endemic species, about 300 odd species of shrubs and flowering trees, which are endemic to the neighborhood. And in trying to do so, we've also reintroduced some of the insects and small reptiles and amphibians into the system. So in our effort to sustain and conserve the organic environment around, we have created a model where the children are actively engaging, and it continues to be a good peer model because the children are taking this initiative elsewhere. So our interest to extend this to the community, we have tried to work with the Directorate of Women Empowerment and the National Urban Livelihood Mission. So we have taken projects on recycling to the community. So the children created an entrepreneurship-based model. So we have a paper recycling plant. Almost all the paper which is generated as a waste goes to the recycling plant, and the children are actually in a space to create craft projects, and some of these apparently are being sold as well. The children generate money, and what they have done is they have created business models for neighborhoods. So we have generated about 300 odd jobs within the school for unskilled and semi-skilled women. So they have taken up projects, and these projects are giving them reasonable livelihoods. So with the seed of interest from the National Biodiversity Authority, we are also venturing into a space for tracking the non-tangible heritages, the oral traditions of trying to have this, what do you call, home remedies and pickle making. So this has generated say interesting jobs for people in the neighborhood. So these are some of the examples. Of course, we are also part of the UN academic impact, and we are an Aspire school. So any investment in any of these is directly linked to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we are trying to see if there is a meaningful transition in terms of looking at development over sustainable models. So these are things which any school can do. It only promotes the interest, and then if we are in the transitioning between the school to the university landscape, if the children are able to carry these skill sets and the purpose or the philosophy of the engagement, I am certain that they would start appreciating and valuing environment and see a lot of purpose, whichever branch that they are in, see the interconnectedness of things and take on to see careers which would definitely make them value environments.
Absolutely. And that evidence that you're saying, that is in terms of that interest turning to livelihoods and that positive effect, hopefully that will keep the commitment going. We did, of course, run a poll with students asking, where do you see environment studies mostly closely aligned with? And Bharat, I want to pull you in there, and social studies appeared. We haven't really touched on that. We've touched a lot on economics. So I want you to, one on, this interface of social studies, but I also, maybe it's a good time to talk about the Pulicat Lake. I don't know whether the society is in that project, because that would be an interesting opportunity or an example to show how the two interface quite well.
Thank you, Kala. So, I mean, for me, the one aspect about the environment that is perhaps unique to us and us only is the equity aspect, right? So all of us know that we live in a country that has tremendous variation in all kinds of socioeconomic variables, right? And we are coming now to understand that many of these variations in socioeconomic variables, let it be poverty, let it be education, let it be health, let it be livelihoods, are strongly influenced by environmental variables. So in a sense, environmental variables amplify the effects of poverty. They amplify the effects of gender inequality. They amplify the effects of, let's say, social structure. They amplify the effects of accessibility to education or to health, and so on. So given that it's a kind of a control variable, what we are finding is that research projects themselves are not, it's not feasible to do disciplinary research projects anymore, right? So one example that I can give you is that, so I mentioned to all of you that I live in the Kriya University campus in Sri City. It's around 80 kilometers from Chennai, and it's just around 10 kilometers away from India's second largest brackish water lake system called Pulicat Lake. Now, Pulicat Lake is around, in both in Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. And it's a very interesting ecosystem, and it's a very interesting social ecological system. So I can give you one example of an idea that I'm trying to now write up into a proposal that I'll send maybe in a month or two. So a lot of women fish vendors sell fish in the local markets. This is a very common thing even in cities, right? But in Pulicat, it serves a certain purpose, a social purpose and an economic purpose. Turns out that most of the good fish, the expensive fish, all goes to cities because you get better money for it, right? But at the same time, a large proportion of people who live in this area consume fish on a very regular basis. So the kind of fish that the local people consume are not the kind of fish that you will get in your Chennai market or your Bangalore market. They're very different kinds of fish. They're far more affordable, and the value chain itself is very, very different. Women fish vendors are a part of this value chain, and they basically buy fish at in a wholesale market early in the morning and then sell it through the day in a retail market, right? They are almost, so I've spoken to quite a few fish vendors so far, and almost all of them, they tell me that they're barely making their ends meet. There are days in which they make no profit, etc., etc. So one thing I noticed is that if you look at behavior of buying fish in India, you go to the fish market, you buy, let's say, a kilogram of fish, The Indian tradition is that you will most likely get that fish cleaned on site, right? So the person will gut it for you, remove the scales, cut it into smaller pieces, put it in a plastic bag and give it to you. When they clean the fish, there are a lot of materials which are left, which are actually quite valuable. They can be pushed into other production systems. For example, into the chicken feed production system or the fish feed production system. So I asked the women fish vendors, why don't you collect all this stuff so that you can make some money out of it? They told me they don't have the time. Their priority is to get the fish gutted and cut and sent off with the customer so that they can take care of the next customer. They don't have the time to collect all this to put it somewhere. So what I'm trying to develop with a few students and with one of the centers of Kriya, which is called IFMR Lead, is a program to enable women fish vendors to collect all of this fish refuse through a local enterprise, to collect all the refuse in one place to increase the quantity, to sell it to the chicken feed factory, and to use that income to buy ice, because preserving fish is their biggest profit destroyer. They can't preserve fish. It's too hot here. It's already, today is, for example, 38 degrees, 80% humidity. It's just the kind of conditions that will make fish rot very fast. So this particular idea of trying to understand the social system and trying to improve the sustainability of it so that people are happier, people are more prosperous at what they do, is one small example. But we do have an environmental center at Kriya where we're focusing on Pulikat in a far more comprehensive fashion. So there's another larger project with Lead that I'm involved with, which we're trying to explore the entire fish value chain, all the way from catching fish to the time it lands on your plate. And in each of these stages, you find a variety of social factors come in that either increase the sustainability of fishing or decrease the sustainability of fishing. And the idea of studying the value chain in very, very specific steps is that you can identify the exact factors that are leading to either unsustainable practices or sustainable practices. So if we find an unsustainable practice, maybe we can try and fix it in some way later, right? And if we have a sustainable practice, maybe it can be expanded a bit more and strengthened a bit more.
Yeah.
So that's just one example that I can give you, Kala.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, there's so much going on, and I know as a university we are kind of very high on that note of the sustainability factor and whatever we do around the renewables. Raman, I want to I know we have before we take one more questions out there, I want you to touch a little bit on what's happening with the EV, the electronic vehicles, and what's really happening. And I know there's lots of noise going on there, but again, there is a lot of confusion. Is that a physics subject? Is that an environment kind of subject? Where does it sit? Is EV really something that we are looking at? Is it a fad? Is it a promise? Any kind of thoughts that you all have been working on in the council that's actually come out?
Sure. I can take that.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
I think your internet is frozen again, Kala.
Mine or mine is okay.
Raman's. I can hear you.
Yeah, hers was okay. I think she's back. Kind of hear her.
Okay, just give me a moment.
Yeah, we got you back.
Okay, able to hear me?
Yes.
I'm able to hear. It only happens when it's my turn. I'm able to hear you guys perfectly well. Okay, good. So I'm saying that sustainable mobility is very much an emerging interest area, and it's very much comes under the purview of the environment and sustainability. What a lot of researchers are trying to understand currently is what could these shared models or these sustainable models of mobility look like, right? It's not a fad, right? Definitely not. It's here to stay. There are a lot of questions around it. how should we make the transition? Is the problem really of the EV, or is the problem of not having the infrastructure to, charge your electric vehicle, right? And so if you don't have the infrastructure, then what is the use of buying a X lakh car, right? To kind of go a distance if it's not even going to get me from Delhi to Chandigarh, for example. So there are a lot of infrastructure sort of problems which are coming up. And I think the larger thing which also people who are in the sustainable mobility kind of space are looking and exploring at is, what do these cities of the future, what are they going to look like, right? So it's not just an EV debate, it's also about like, improving other forms of transport in your 0 to 5 kilometer. If we see, for example, a lot of our day-to-day needs, etc., the neighborhood grocery store, rations, etc., are all in a radius of 0 to 5 kilometers typically, right? So how do we kind of promote a culture, right? Or create the infrastructures, dedicated cycle lanes, promote people to start thinking like that, where at least for their immediate sort of needs, they are not, first of all, just, kind of picking up, their car and sort of driving out. That's one. And long term, for, for EVs and sustainable mobility to, of course, take off, the infrastructure needs to be in place, the government commitment needs to be in place, and also the automakers, right, need to be committed to making the transition. And then communities need to be incentives are a bad thing. I think my researchers would give me a dressing down if I said incentives were the way to go. We don't believe in incentives. Incentives promote very short-term behaviors, but mindset changes for people to make that transition.
Yeah.
So definitely, an emerging area, definitely an interesting area, and definitely very much within the sustainable mobility space. I think another thing which I would like to say is, what Bharat was mentioning, right? I think a lot of the problem, and what you said about social sciences, right? Where is that interlinkage? A lot of the issue is how we are actually valuing progress. How are we valuing progress as, as a nation, right? Not even as a nation, as a global community, right? So if you look at, for example, the Human Development Index, right? It measures it on 3 basics: long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living, right? That's the HDI definition. But, for example, and then if you look at another definition, right? It says that, for example, if we look at global wealth, and this is, by a professor at the LSE, right? He said that, if you look at global wealth, it can be divided into produced capital, 21%, human capital, 56%, and natural capital, 22%. Now, if produced and natural capital are roughly the same percentage at 21 and 22%, why is it that over time we have valued one so much more than the other, right? And people are trying to do various things, to kind of reduce this inequity. People are looking at it from the resource footprint lens. That classic thing of economies, therefore we need a lot more carbon. But then if you look at more developed nations, their lifestyles are much more focused towards consumerism. So that's also, that's also a bad practice. Many countries are now experimenting with green accounting, and how do we, actually account for all of this, right? And the third thing, which Bharat, of course, pointed out, is inequity. How do we reduce, rather than looking at an India-wide target of emissions, of how much we're going to reduce carbon footprint, are we thinking enough about how are we reducing inequities within our own country, while making sure that people have access to all the basics, like access to clean air, access to clean water, access to modern sanitization, right? And then finally, how are they influencing our indicators like our mortality or, our economics sides of it? So there is a need for a lot more creativity, I would say, on the social sciences bit as well, to look at this whole debate beyond the economic debate. There's really like need for several paradigm changes, right? And a lot of researchers are looking at it. So that also, I would encourage our students to kind of think about that. Why are we valuing things one over the other? And just because this is the framework that's been going on doesn't mean it's the right framework.
Yeah. And at the council, if you can just give me, sorry, keeping you there, at the council, when you actually work on these teams, let's say a team works on renewable, there's a team working on mobility. So when you actually say it's a team, is that a team of people with very different skills coming together on one common
research problem or research agenda?
Yeah.
So they would have, like, for example, they would have like a few I would say entry level or base skills, right? Either a degree in economics or a degree in engineering or a degree in environmental sciences, right? Some sort of leaning. But beyond that, yes, these are interdisciplinary teams which are looking at the same research problem from that research agenda lens. Okay. And then, I mean, when we were founded 10 years ago, we were like, it was our CEO, Dr. Arnabha Ghosh, who founded it. So it was, he was literally employee number 1, and then there was an employee number 2. But now that so in our initial years, everybody worked on everything, right? Because these were all researchers, all looking at research problems and then coming together to study them. Now, as we've grown and we're 119, we have got more structured focus areas where, for example, research problems to do with renewables would be looked after by one team. But one of the things we always say, right, and actually on every Friday, we have a team meeting where one research team presents to the rest of the 119 people, because we want to be able to anticipate questions from every lens. Yeah. Right? So being integrated is a core value for us.
Yeah, interesting. And this whole space, I'm going to come to Bharat and Bhavani Shankar as well. There's a couple of questions that came up earlier when we asked students to submit as well. So clearly, one of the this generation, really, one of the generational values, if you like, they're beginning to look at sustainability and sustainable business practices. For instance, they're beginning to admire companies for their business practice. They're beginning to admire institutions, for those kind of practices. So, Dr. Bhavani Shankar, I wanted to ask you this in terms of as an education institution, as a school itself, is this something that you have kept as well as a benchmark to make sure that there are not just sustainability in terms of environmental awareness, but just practices, and that becomes a part of the value that the institution actually represents? And to some extent, are students aware of something like that when they come to you?
Largely, I would say, yes, we are moving in that direction. So number one, so can we role model the kind of practices that we expect in the children when they walk out of the school? So this is something that all the adults, it's just not the schools being educational institutions, they are looked at very closely. But do we model these, in our day-to-day activities, or is there some amount of hypocrisy in these practices? So we only preach certain things and then look back and enjoy whatever we should not be doing. So this is the question, and of course it's a values conflict. If you ask me to give you a very honest answer about say whether I'm a great role model in exhibiting it every single time, say all through my life, possibly the answer is no. However, in my effort to make changes within myself, I would have to acknowledge the fact that yes, we are changing in the reality of the space. So Bharat did mention what happens with respect to the inequality that exists between the realizable, a very myopic realizable for a person that is engaged in a particular task on hand. He's not worried about what's going to happen 10 days from now or 10 years from now, because the task on hand is more important to him than what happens to the world. And that's the same thing that I talked about. So the future that we have created for our children, they were never a part of that particular decision or an action. So how am I going to make that change? Do I integrate some of these practices in what I do on a daily basis? Say when we engage with the students, I mean, they are hugely impressionable. So the change already happens when they are in school. So if they move on to the universities, they would only have these values conflicts which are hitting bigger, because whatever they needed to have picked up, so they would have picked up when they are about 17, 18, I guess. So if there is any damage, see, I guarantee that the damage has happened when they are in school. So the damage does not happen when they are at the university. So there is so much so, I would say that the schools have a greater responsibility to endorse to this commitment and practices in letter and spirit. See, I would say that yes, I falter, I make big mistakes here and there, but then there is always this line of looking back at the mistakes and making these corrections. The more and more the children see the adults, the educators, and the teachers engage in the purpose to get into sustainable practices, I'm sure they are going to take it forward. So every single activity, I can't give examples, every single activity, I need to start practicing it and demonstrating that it happens to me as a way of life. Only then I would say that the children will move into the direction of acceptance, and this acceptance will be reflected in what they do as adults. So to that extent, I think the responsibility rests with the school, and I would say the schools are in a better space to make this change.
Thank you. Bharat, I'm going to ask you a little bit to shed light. I know we of course have a pretty large, decent cohort at CREA in terms of the environment more broadly, but do you want to just spend maybe 5 minutes, because there's been some questions around the interface with biology. So if you just want to spend a little bit about what we are doing with Dr. Shivani Jadeja's team, and what really happens more broadly within the environment spectrum at CREA and where that interface is.
Thanks, Kala. So, what is there are a couple of programs in CREA that are what are called cognates, in the sense that they're very, very closely related to each other. So you can't study environment studies, for example, without some basic knowledge of physics and chemistry, without a lot of knowledge about biology. So what we've done at the programmatic level is to introduce ways in which courses can talk to each other. So there are courses in biology that will talk to the environment studies. There will be students from both streams in class, and so on, right? So that is one at the programmatic level. We build these linkages. At a more fundamental level, I think it's an acknowledgement that there is a whole world of studies waiting to be done in these individual disciplines as well. So I have a colleague who studies, for example, what the physics of particulate matter is, right? So if we create pollution, what is the physics of that? How does it travel? What physical factors contribute to the way it behaves from a physics point of view, right? At a different level, where Shivani Jadeja herself is looking at how climate change is going to change the way plants and animals interact. The most common plant-animal interaction is pollination, as many of you may know, right? So insects do have to transport pollen from one plant to the other for fertilization. Now, this is being fundamentally impacted by climate change, but you need a very good knowledge of ecology and evolution in order to study this particular plant-animal interaction, right? So this is just like one small example of how close cognates enrich each other in the study of the environment. And the course level integrations are very high. So I hope that answers your question, Kala.
Thank you, thank you. And there has been a question from one of the students, and I know we've delved about this, Bharat, but I'm going to ask if you can spend a minute about it. What is an environmental economist? What is the career of an environmental economist?
Oh my God, that is a fantastic question. I mean, so like I was saying earlier, this question could be kind of tackled at multiple levels. At the very global level, there is this whole thing about how every single economic production system basically externalizes all environmental impact, which means it's a very complicated way of saying that when you buy a bottle of Coke for 20 rupees, that 20 rupees does not indicate its real value. If you account for its environmental impact, the price of that bottle of Coke is probably even double or triple that. And the job of an ecological economist or an environmental economist is to really figure out this. What is the true cost of anything if you account for environmental and social impact? So that would be the way I would put it.
Yeah, I think that was very, very, very well put. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. There's, of course, all sorts of questions. There is a question that asks, where does the environment and literature stand? And I guess that's across the board in terms of how you combine a passion for something and your passion for writing. I guess we need a lot more champions of environment to write.
Yeah, Kala, if I can take that.
Yes,
I think
yes.
it's a very good question. And, great writing, right? Like I said, like, for example, one of our, our outreach team, our communications team, for example, at the council is a significant team. It's a significant team, about 5 to 6 folks, and we're constantly looking, for more people. So literature fits in very well if you want to be associated in the social sector, because anything that they would be producing as an outcome or an impact, till the time it doesn't actually, doesn't reach the right audiences in the right format that is easy and relevant for them to consume, right? So you can imagine, like, a lot of the intellectual data, etc., like, to reach like a lay person, a common person, they'll get lost in the research terminologies, right? So how do you simplify that? I love this story, that Bharat told us about the lake and the fisherwomen over there, right? How do you simplify situations and research problems that you're studying, or environmental impacts that you're studying, into very simple frameworks, narratives, and stories? So I would say there is a huge role for folks who are interested in literature and writing, to kind of play into the environmental space, because they really can be the influencers who take these stories to households, right? Take this debate from the margins to the mainstream and influence real change.
Yeah, absolutely. And Bharati, I was just going to ask you that question coming up, but I see you're typing an answer. But yes, for sure. Thanks, Raman. I mean, I know that we have, for instance, Bharat, I know that in Korea, we've got 2-3 students in the environment who are so passionate about communications and writing that they would never stop every opportunity that they get to actually create such great campaigns and write about it. And like students like Smriti and Neha was so passionate about the environment, and I've personally worked with a couple of them. So interesting. So Bharat, there is that question about the corporate sector. So while, I'll ask you and Raman to of course comment, but it's about if I'm interested in environment, great, I can work in policy, I can work in grassroots, but I want to work in corporate because corporates are doing the maximum impact. What kind of jobs await me?
Great question. Raman, do you want to take that first or shall I?
Yeah, you could go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. So, I was in Azim Premji University before I joined Kriya. And I was fortunate to work with somebody who was doing the Wipro sustainability report. We actually taught a course together. And it was a very revelatory experience for me because we looked at sustainability beyond the environment. We looked at social sustainability in a very big way as well, right? And every company prides itself, or rather, any company worth its salt will pride itself on the sustainability reporting that it does, sometimes on an annual basis. So what we're really looking at is a very, very granular analysis of various aspects of sustainability in the corporate environment, ranging all the way from biophysical variables and energy variables. How much water do you consume? How much pollution do you create? Where does the energy that you run your offices come from? What part of renewable energy forms that mix? What is the kind of greenery available in the campuses that you maintain? And so on. So that's all the biophysical aspects. But on the social aspects, how much of gender parity do you have in your organization? What is the career trajectory pathway for women? How many women do you have in leadership? What are you doing to make sure that women get into leadership roles? What kind of benefits do you offer to employees to make it a healthier workplace to be in, whether it's physical mental well-being or mental well-being. All of this is also part of sustainability reporting now. What impact are you having on your immediate surroundings, right? So if you take a neighborhood, what are you doing to contribute to the immediate community around you? So sustainability reporting is a beautiful, fertile field. And once you get into corporates that, once you get into multinational corporates that have interests in a range of fields, it's possible also to find roles that I think will focus on maybe just sustainable production systems, sustainable value chain systems, sustainable enterprise resource management, reducing the carbon footprint of your production, and so on and so forth. If you get into the industrial ecology side of it, you can get into the real nuts and bolts of, for example, how you put a cell phone together. Now, the cell phone is the most amazing piece of technology in that what you're holding in your hand has components from maybe 30, 40 other countries. It's being assembled somewhere else. It's traveled to you from many, many thousands of kilometers away, right? And there are unsustainable aspects built into almost every component of your mobile phone. And there are a lot of companies now working to reduce that. Within the tech space, again, there's a lot of stuff happening, like I told you, in enterprise resource planning, in your ERP systems, in your value chain systems, in your supply chain systems, to reduce carbon footprints. Because people are figuring out that the bottom line of the environment is going to bite them harder very soon if they don't do something about it. So I would sum up this by saying that, don't think of the environment as something that only exists in forests or in rivers or in lakes or wherever else. It exists wherever we are, in your office, wherever, in your house. So, I mean, there is really no way of confining it to any single system.
Right. And I think the only thing I would add to that is that, like if you're interested on the corporate side of things, right? Again, do your homework, right? Like which are the corporates who are walking the talk on these issues and are really committed to sustainability reporting, to sustainability teams, and which are the ones who are doing it as lip service. So that little bit of spade work you'll have to do. Of course, organizations like Mahindra, Tata, these are like role models when it comes to some of these practices. But like Bharat rightly pointed out, it's in every space today, but just do your homework. So you don't sign up for an organization and then realize that, you're fighting hard for a role which actually doesn't exist.
Fair enough. And I think, in sustainability divisions, whether that's energy, efficiency, consulting, there's so much going on in the corporate space. Thank you so much.